What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today I wanted to sit down to do a little bit of a figure review. Today I wanted to review Bandai's Godzilla The Ride. This is Godzilla 2021 from Toho. And I wanted to do so, of course, because Godzilla The Ride, aka Godzilla The Ride Giant Monsters Ultimate Battle 2021, was directed by Takashi Yamazaki with VFX from Shirogumi. Of course, Takashi Yamazaki is also the director of Godzilla Minus One. Shirogumi is the company behind the VFX for Godzilla Minus One. And the Godzilla used in Godzilla The Ride was the base point for the model for Godzilla in Godzilla Minus One, so I figured it would be a nice little precursor to celebrate leading into the release of Godzilla Minus One in America. This is going to be one of my stranger figure reviews because I'm not unboxing him. He's already out of the box, which is kind of a nice thing that Bandai does. I like it because there's no need for packaging. It's very sleek and to the point. I also like it because it cuts down on waste, so the figures are basically all the waste there is. Also, one of the weirder parts of this is this little tag that dangles off of him, which I'll give a little shout out to because I think it's very sleek. I like the Godzilla render here on the side, and then you flip it over and it's got these nice Godzilla dorsal plate silhouettes. It also opens up with all the legal information on the inside. And I really like that because, again, it cuts down on the waste. And in my case, there will be no waste because the weird thing about Bandai figures is that there's this weird attitude towards removing the tags, at least in America. So I'm not gonna. I don't want to anger the Godzilla gods out there by committing blasphemy by taking the Bandai tag off. I guess it's just kind of a Godzilla fandom thing where Godzilla fans don't want the tags taken off. And I guess this is one of the few cases where I'll be a pushover and I'll leave the tag on as a result. It kind of gets in the way of the figure, but ultimately I don't care. It's fine. I got this Godzilla The Ride at Anime Matsuri 2023. When the official Godzilla store from Tokyo came to Anime Matsuri 2023, they were selling Godzilla The Ride in addition to a couple other Godzilla The Ride merchandise related pieces because of course they were doing it in celebration of the upcoming Godzilla Minus One. And seeing this guy was just so beautiful I had to grab him. And it's interesting because, again, like I said, this is the base point for Godzilla Minus One, and it is inferior in almost every single way, as I'll talk about when I talk about the Minus One, which will be a different video. I don't think this figure is great, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but for me the most obvious and notable is the paint job. So actually I'm gonna start with paint for this video, and then I'll get into the rest of the figure later. There are some good details on the paint job. For instance, I appreciate that the fingernails are painted, I appreciate that the toenails are painted. I think Godzilla's got a nice paint application overall. It's not like there's any spotty issues with it where I'm seeing mistakes or errors in the paint job. On the face there are these nice bright green highlights that add this level of definition and texture to Godzilla, and there's actually green highlighting all throughout. So I want to give credit where credit is due because it's a very well realized figure. The mouth looks fantastic with the pink tongue and the pink back of the mouth. You also have got individually sculpted and painted teeth, which is really impressive for a figure of this end. And then you've got these white beady eyes, which pop really well. It kind of runs off a cliff for me when you compare it to the real Godzilla design from Godzilla The Ride though. Also, it kind of runs itself off a cliff when you think of the price, because I think I spent $35 on this, something like that. It's kind of expensive for a Bandai figure. I don't know if it's worth $35, but it just doesn't really make sense to me when you compare it to Godzilla from Godzilla The Ride, because he's totally gray and brown. Like some of the images, some of the poster renders, he looks very bluish gray, very traditionally Godzilla, and then in the actual Godzilla The Ride, he looks a lot more gray and brown in a very Godzilla Minus One styled way. So the decision to make the toy green is a really bold choice that I don't like. I don't think it works. I think this is a strange color choice, especially because when you compare it to the official model sheet for Godzilla from Godzilla The Ride, well, the sculpt is pretty dang accurate. The paint is so wildly different, where the model sheet for Godzilla The Ride has a very brown Godzilla, and that's just not what we see here. Going away from that, I want to talk a bit about the overall figure, because the sculpt and the overall figure are kind of one and the same, but there are some differences for me. The overall figure I think is very nice. Like, it's a nice soft plastic. Actually, this tail piece on the tip here is kind of a dense soft plastic, but Bandai makes their figures out of nice squishy soft vinyl plastic. I really like that. They're pretty hollow, which is nice because they don't feel breakable. They feel really nice in hand. They've got a really nice quality to them, and it's something unique to Bandai. You don't see that with other toy companies, certainly not in America. I always like the feel of a Bandai. I like that they can bend, and I like that you're not gonna break them when you're forcing these pieces to do this because they're toys, so you're gonna be able to play with them. You'll be able to have your Godzilla bend his arms and get into fights and claw his way through battles, and you don't need to worry about breaking him. That is what I loved about my Bandais growing up, and that's what I still love about them because it gives a lot of availability to the child to play with. And as far as collectors go, soft vinyl plastic just looks really nice. It's not glossy or aggressive. It just looks and feels nice. You can also kind of pinch in on the mouth, which is something I always loved to do to make him roar. And so I want to give credit to the figure's overall feel, and I want to give credit where credit's due to the sculpt, because there is a lot of really good detailing and execution in this sculpt. The feet look pretty amazing. Some of the biggest toe, the pointer toe, could use a little more detailing, but the legs have these really incredibly detailed grooves in them. All through the body, you've got this really nice attention to detail. The skin texture looks amazing. The arms look amazing. Again, some areas on the arms look like they could use a little more detailing, but overall, the skin textures just look really nice. The way you blend from the chest into the neck looks really nice. Going up Godzilla's head looks really nice. The face has a really nice sculpt. I really like what they've done with the dorsal fins. They're very accurate to Godzilla the Ride, including the kind of weird sporadic placement of the dorsal spines. One thing that I really love about it is the texture and detailing on the individual spines themselves. It looks really nice. They've done a really good job giving detail to this figure. Where they run into an issue is that it just doesn't really look a ton like Godzilla the Ride to me. Well, I can generally see that this is Godzilla the Ride, especially in the spines themselves. The face looks a little different to me. I think the one Godzilla the Ride has a bit more sunken in eyes, which kind of create a bit more of a pronounced face. And also, this guy's just kind of chunky. You can see he's just a thick boy. And Godzilla in Godzilla the Ride doesn't always look like that, especially in the official render they've released. Also, really dislike the hands on this figure, which are pretty accurate to the wide palms that Godzilla the Ride features, but they're just so open and strange and wide. He looks like slapping Godzilla. That's all he's good for, would be to do some big slaps. It's just kind of strange, and I'm sure many people will argue, well, this is the official Godzilla model, because obviously they've probably taken the CG scan and just transferred it over to a figure, and that's what they've printed here. And so it is accurate to the Godzilla the Ride. And I would argue that sometimes a direct translation doesn't always work out too well, because again, this enormous midsection doesn't reflect the way he feels and moves in Godzilla the Ride. So I would have liked him to be a little more sunken in and slim, because I think it would have reflected the Ride a little better. There's not a lot of articulation you can talk about with these figures. You've got these obvious joint lines, which I really dislike. I always dislike when you can see those on figures. That's always kind of been an issue I've had with some of these Bandai figures. These ones are pretty aggressive, and they're not points of articulation. You also have one in the back here where the dorsal spines pop in, and that's another issue I've had with a lot of Godzilla toys growing up. It's not articulated. The only articulation you actually have on this guy is in the legs. 1, 2 for the legs, and then 3, 4 for the arms, and that's it. The mouth doesn't articulate, the tail doesn't articulate, but that's okay. They make up for it in the fact that he's soft vinyl plastic, so you can kind of move him around as if he was articulated anyways. I'll do a quick figure comparison here for a few of the other Godzilla toys I own, just so we can see what we're up against. I don't really collect Bandai figures very often, but here's, I believe, an American Bandai Burning Godzilla, and you can see the two of them side by side, and they're pretty different approaches to making Godzilla. I think that the Godzilla the Ride one outshines this American one in almost every way, down to the plastics used. This one's a lot harder plastic, and I think you can tell because the sculpt is not as rich or beautiful. Another Bandai Godzilla I own is the GMK, which I believe was another Bandai America. And there's the two of them standing next to each other. I wanted to get GMK out because GMK was such a big influence on the director Takashi Yamazaki, so seeing them side by side is pretty fun. And again, I think it goes to highlight the power of the actual Japanese Bandai Godzilla figures, because I just think the soft plastics look a little better. I think they're a little more intricate. On the other end of the spectrum here, we have Playmates Shin Godzilla, and I wanted to get him out because there's some similar resemblances between the Godzilla the Ride design and Shin Godzilla, I think, and so I wanted to get the Playmates one out just to say, oh my god, Playmates, do better. Here you can see the two of them next to each other, and the Playmates one is glossy and ugly and unrendered and smooth, and just shout out to Bandai for not doing that. Good job, Bandai. Playmates needs to raise its bar to Bandai quality. That'd be nice. The last Godzilla I wanted to compare this guy to was actually NECA's Godzilla 1989, and the reason I wanted to get this one out is because this is kind of the base Heisei model for all Godzillas who have really come since, and of course has gone on to become just the standard Toho Godzilla that they used to represent Godzilla overall, and is also a clear inspiration for Takashi Yamazaki's Godzilla, so I wanted to show them off side by side. I actually think these guys look really wonderful together, and here you can see that NECA obviously has some more impressive articulation and some more impressive sculpting details, as you'd expect given that NECA is a higher price point typically. The final one I wanted to compare him to is Ghidorah from GMK. This is another Bandai America. The only reason I wanted to get Ghidorah out to compare the two of them side by side, and they actually look really nice together, is because of course that's who Godzilla fights in Godzilla the Ride. He beats down and fights Ghidorah, which is just good stuff. And while I think they did make a Ghidorah for Godzilla the Ride, I think it was only a limited time thing. I'm fairly confident it's very expensive nowadays. So here's the best we're gonna get. I don't really own many King Ghidorah figures, so this is kind of the best I can do. It's a fun showdown. I like it. And that'll be my thoughts on this guy. I just kind of wanted to pop on to give my quick little thoughts about this figure because, of course, I want to celebrate the release of Godzilla Minus One. And if I'm going to talk about the Bandai Godzilla Minus One, I figured I'd do my stepping stones by covering the Godzilla The Ride first. While it's not my favorite Godzilla design by any means, and I think there are a lot of things in the actual design itself that could be improved, I think Bandai's done a fairly decent job adapting it with some small critiques like the wideness of him. I think there was probably a smarter way to pose the hands because currently it looks like neither hand belongs on the side of the body it's on. And then the paint job really just trips me up. I don't get why he's so green. Of course, on the camera here, it looks more black and gray, and maybe that's what they were going for, but in person, he's clearly green. So overall, I'd give this guy probably a 7 out of 10. I think he's a pretty decent figure. I think there was a little room for improvement, but overall, I think it's pretty cool. And I just want to say, shout out Toho for making a figure for Godzilla The Ride. That's really neat. I think that's a super cool thing to do. It's just a nice way to bring the ride home for people who either didn't get to go on it or who want to take those memories home with them. So that was pretty sweet. That'll do it for this one, guys. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you want to check out the Patreon, you can using the link in the description below where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you guys next time for the next one. D-Man out.